On August 19th, at approximately 7:45 local time, regional Caribbean media outlets simultaneously reported a noticeable increase in U.S. naval activity off the coast of Venezuela. The USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group, escorted by a mix of guided missile destroyers and support vessels, was observed maneuvering into international waters north of Caracas. According to the Pentagon, the deployment was aimed at ensuring peace, maritime stability, and the free flow of commerce in the Caribbean, a statement that many analysts in the region interpreted as a clear signal of deterrence rather than mere routine presence. On the same day, U.S. allies Colombia and Guyana publicly voiced support for Washington's move, stressing that such actions were necessary to prevent further escalation following what they described as increasingly provocative maneuvers by Venezuelan forces in recent months. The diplomatic backing gave the U.S. position greater legitimacy, reinforcing the perception of a collective security response rather than unilateral pressure. Meanwhile, in Caracas, the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense issued a sharply worded statement just 2 hours later, denouncing the American presence as a direct encirclement and deliberate provocation. However, Western intelligence sources later claimed that Moscow had covertly facilitated the transfer of the three M22 Oreshnik hypersonic missile system, an export-optimized variant of the Zircon, into Venezuelan hands. If verified, this would represent a dramatic shift in the balance of power across the Caribbean. Still, military analysts emphasized that the U.S. Navy's superior integration of surveillance, missile defense, and electronic warfare capabilities would continue to provide Washington and its allies with a decisive edge in the near term. On August 20th, at approximately 9:40 local time, newly released commercial satellite imagery revealed that squadrons of Su-30 Mk-2 and MiG-29 fighter jets of the Venezuelan Air Force were conducting unusually frequent training drills at El Bertador Air Base. Military analysts noted that the number of sorties had nearly doubled compared to previous weeks, suggesting that Caracas was accelerating preparations for a potential direct aerial confrontation. At 11:15 the same day, the U.S. Fourth Fleet carried out a large-scale missile defense exercise in the southeastern Caribbean. The U.S. Navy confirmed the deployment of the Aegis Combat System aboard Arleigh Burke-class destroyers paired with SM-3 and SM-6 interceptor missiles. Washington emphasized that the drills showcased its ability to effectively neutralize any airborne or ballistic missile threat in the region. Observers highlighted that by releasing official images and reports, the United States not only demonstrated deterrence, but also underscored its technological superiority in missile defense compared to potential adversaries. In the afternoon, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency meeting at Washington's request. The U.S. ambassador to the UN accused Venezuela of endangering regional security by accepting strategic weapons from Russia. The Russian representative immediately dismissed the allegation, labeling it unverified information. Nonetheless, several council members expressed concern over the escalation, particularly after Washington asserted that its claims were backed by intelligence reports. At 7:20 local time, several major U.S. newspapers reported that a Venezuelan special reconnaissance team, allegedly accompanied by Russian advisors, had obtained sensitive information on a supposed American airstrike plan against military facilities near Caracas. The story quickly drew international attention, suggesting that Washington's operations had been compromised. However, within hours, U.S. officials firmly rejected the claim, stressing that no such strike planning existed and labeling the reports as disinformation designed to mislead the public. Analysts noted that while Venezuela succeeded in generating headlines, there was little credible evidence to substantiate its narrative. By 10:45, Caracas launched a coordinated media campaign, amplifying the claim and accusing the United States of preparing a systematic invasion. Venezuelan state television and allied outlets broadcast the allegation repeatedly, portraying it as proof of imminent aggression. Yet outside observers pointed out inconsistencies. The so-called leaked data contained outdated satellite imagery and unverifiable sources, reinforcing Washington's assertion that the episode was a manufactured pretext. Later that evening, Moscow, the Russian Foreign Ministry, issued a formal statement backing Venezuela's position. Moscow argued that the United States had no right to maintain such a dense military presence in the Western Hemisphere, and insisted that its deployments were destabilizing. Russian diplomats went further, claiming that the 1947 Rio Treaty was obsolete and no longer relevant to today's international order. For Washington, the incident underscored how both Moscow and Caracas increasingly relied on information warfare, even as the United States maintained a clear operational advantage in intelligence and military readiness. In the early of August 22nd at 2:15 Caracas time, Venezuela, with direct technical assistance from Russian advisors, launched a surprise preemptive strike. From El Libertador Air Base, multiple Su-30 Mk2 and MiG-29 fighters armed with precision guided bombs roared into the night sky. Almost simultaneously at 2:27, at least 2 Okhotnik hypersonic missiles were fired from mobile coastal launchers along Venezuela's northern shoreline. Their declared objective was ambitious tow target the USS George Washington CVN-73 and its escorting strike group positioned roughly 250 kilometers offshore. This marked the first time a Russian-aligned nation in South America attempted to employ hypersonic weapons directly against U.S. forces in a real-world engagement, a move calculated to shock and demonstrate capability. As 235, the American Carrier Strike Group responded with discipline and speed. The Aegis combat system, already on heightened alert, tracked the inbound Okhotnik missiles. According to the Pentagon's post-action report, 2 interceptors SM-6 dual-capability missiles successfully neutralized both threats in the terminal phase of flight. U.S. officials highlighted that one Okhotnik managed to approach the edge of the defensive perimeter before being destroyed, illustrating both the weapon's velocity and the robustness of Aegis interception. Meanwhile, Venezuelan fighters pressed their assault. At 2:42, the incoming strike package attempted to release guided bombs against distant radar signatures of the carrier group. Yet the U.S. Navy's FA-18EF Super Hornets from the George Washington's Air Wing intercepted aggressively. Several bombs were destroyed mid-air, and at least 3 Venezuelan aircraft were forced to disengage after being painted by advanced radar locks. By 310, the battle had subsided. Despite the scale of the attack, no American vessels suffered direct damage. The Pentagon later described the incident as an unprecedented act of armed provocation, stressing that U.S. defensive systems had proven capable of withstanding even the most advanced hypersonic threat attempted so far in the hemisphere. For many observers, the engagement underscored Washington's continuing technological and tactical edge, even against weapons designed to erode that advantage. During the night of August 22nd, leading into August 23rd, the United States executed a large-scale retaliatory strike with precision and speed. At 0045 local time, waves of Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles were launched from submerged U.S. Navy submarines and Arleigh Burke-class destroyers stationed in the Caribbean. The missiles, flying at low altitude to avoid radar detection, raced toward key Venezuelan military installations, including El Libertador Air Base and a heavily fortified missile storage facility near Puerto Cabo. By 1:30, satellite reconnaissance confirmed the impact of multiple strikes. Plumes of smoke rose from destroyed hangars, fuel depots, and hardened shelters. While imagery indicated that at least one missile storage site had been obliterated in a secondary explosion, analysts observed that the precision of the Tomahawk strikes demonstrated not only America's long-range reach, but also its ability to underscore hostile infrastructure without deploying ground forces. At 210, the Pentagon issued an official statement. Our operations did not target civilians. The strikes were carefully calibrated to eliminate military capabilities that directly threatened U.S. and allied forces in the region independent monitoring. Groups later noted that the impact zones were indeed confined to military compounds, with no verified reports of collateral damage strengthening Washington's claim of restraint, despite the scale of the attack. That morning, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro appeared on state television, declaring that the nation was now in a state of legitimate defensive war. His speech sought to rally domestic support, yet observers noted the defensive tone, contrasting with the earlier boldness of Venezuela's preemptive strike. Meanwhile, at 12:40 Moscow time, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a sharply worded condemnation, accusing the United States of aggression and warning of unpredictable consequences. Western analysts, however, assessed Moscow's reaction as rhetorical rather than operational, pointing out that Russia's ability to provide direct assistance across the Atlantic remained limited. The events reinforced perceptions that while Caracas could count on political statements from its allies, Washington held the decisive upper hand in both technology and rapid strike capability. On August 24th at 9 o'clock local time, both Colombia and Guyana officially announced that they would grant the United States access to several logistical bases, significantly strengthening America's supply chain and operational endurance in the region. The decision was broadcast publicly, underscoring the growing alignment of Washington's neighbors against Venezuelan aggression. Military analysts emphasized that this move gave U.S. forces enhanced refueling, resupply, and staging options, capabilities that could prove decisive in sustaining extended operations. By 12:15 Brussels time, the European Union issued a formal communiqué urging restraint from all parties. However, in practice, most NATO member states openly sided with Washington, describing Venezuela's actions as a serious violation of international law. Several European capitals further hinted at the possibility of providing intelligence sharing or logistical support if the crisis deepened, signaling that the transatlantic alliance was more united than Caracas might have anticipated. Later that evening, the Russian Foreign Ministry reiterated that it would continue to provide technical assistance to Venezuela. Yet, the statement carefully avoided confirming whether Moscow was prepared to intervene militarily, leaving ambiguity about the extent of its actual commitment. Observers in the West judged this as a sign that Russia's support was more symbolic than operational, constrained by distance and global priorities. Over the course of August 26th and 27th, the Caribbean entered a period of tense military standoff, with both sides reinforcing their presence. At 8 a.m. on August 26th, Washington confirmed the arrival of a second carrier strike group led by the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower CVN-69, joining the USS George Washington already on station. The deployment doubled America's carrier-based aviation capacity in the region and projected overwhelming maritime power within striking distance of the Venezuelan coast. At 15:20 Caracas time, Russian support became more visible. A reconnaissance vessel entered Venezuelan waters, while several Russian transport aircraft landed in Caracas, carrying technical personnel and equipment. Western intelligence services assess these reinforcements as limited in scope, enough to bolster Venezuela's morale and provide technical expertise, but insufficient to shift the balance of power against the U.S. Navy's growing presence. By August 29th at 10:45 inside the United States, the crisis ignited political debate. Congressional hearings revealed sharp divisions. Several lawmakers urged a sustained military campaign to eliminate the threat entirely, arguing that only decisive action could secure long-term stability in the hemisphere. Others cautioned against entanglement, warning that an extended conflict in the Western Hemisphere could drain resources and provoke unpredictable consequences. Despite the disagreement, bipartisan consensus acknowledged one fact: America currently held the strategic upper hand both at sea and in the skies above the Caribbean. On August 28th, Washington, under mounting diplomatic pressure from both the United Nations and the Organization of American States, OAS. The United States declared that its immediate military objectives had been achieved. As a result, American forces announced a temporary suspension of airstrikes across Venezuela. The Pentagon emphasized that U.S. carrier strike groups remained fully intact and unscathed with their layered defenses, proving resilient against every attempted attack. Officials added that the fleet was prepared to retaliate decisively should any further aggression occur. At 12:10, Caracas President Nicolas Maduro proclaimed what he called a spiritual victory, insisting that Venezuela's ability to openly confront American forces had sent a historic message of defiance. His remarks were carried live on state television, aiming to rally domestic audiences. Yet, analysts worldwide noted a stark contrast between the rhetoric and reality. Venezuela's military infrastructure had been severely damaged. Its combat aircraft, attrition was rising, and key missile systems were crippled. Most experts agreed that Caracas would face years of difficulty restoring its lost capabilities. 5 hours later, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued another strongly worded statement, condemning the United States. Moscow accused Washington of escalatory behavior and reiterated its political support for Caracas. However, the absence of any direct Russian military involvement underscored the limits of that backing. Western observers concluded that while Russia could provide diplomatic cover, Venezuela remained largely isolated in practical terms, with the balance of power still overwhelmingly tilted toward the United States and its allies. Eyes.